So once again, welcome to this class, and this class is about questioning skills useful to teachers in the classroom. What kind of questions we need to ask, and then how questions are going to make the classes a little more involving and interactive and student-centered. How students gain from making the classroom full of questions, and how, as teachers, we benefit by asking questions. This is what the thrust of the presentation is going to be. Uh, may I start by asking you this question? What do you expect to learn in this class? Anyone? Any ideas?
To understand the fundamental stuff.
Okay, the fundamentals of questioning skills. Okay, good. That's a good idea. Yeah. And the art of asking questions, Jilam. Yes, that's the title. And that also is the focus. Thank you, Jilam. Okay, let me share. I have put everything in the form of a question today so that my slides are full of questions, and perhaps that will motivate you to ask more questions in your classes. So I'm going to focus on these areas. Why do we ask questions in the class? What are good questioning skills? Somebody said the attitude in which we ask questions, importance of questions. Thank you very much, Biman. Thank you, and others. Okay, what are good questioning skills? In case we are asking questions, are there any skills of asking those questions? Or are there any kinds of questions that are more effective than others? Then how effective are our own questioning skills? Is there a way I can check whether my questioning skills are good, are effective, and are not? And what are the various types of questions? I'll spend quite some time on this so that I mean, in case you do not know what are the various kinds of questions, and then what questions serve what purpose, I'm sure that will be helpful to young teachers. And finally, in case I want to improve my questioning skills, how do I do that? That's the last part of my presentation. If you have a mobile phone with you, please go to Menti, Menti, and type that number that you see, the pin number 6100763.
So where do we have to type?
You go to Google
Acha.
and type Menti. If you are on a mobile phone, you can still, I mean, you can go open another window and you can go to Google and you can search for Menti, Menti, and it asks you for a pin number, and type the pin number 6100763. And we'll find a question there. The question is, which of these is the most important advantage of asking questions in a class or during a class? That's a question we'll find. You'll also find 5 possible answers. Let me warn you here, all 5 answers are correct. But because the question is the most important one, you have to choose only one of the 5. For all 5 are correct answers, but you have to choose one of the 5. Anyway, let me stop there. I think we've waited enough. I'm stopping sharing. So before I close this, 16 people have voted so far. Out of them, 75% of you feel that questions help you fuel reflective thinking on the part of the students and also perhaps on the part of the teachers. And 19% of you say that questions help you empower students, because I think the students get engaged, the classroom becomes student-centered, and students perhaps are empowered to decide the course of the class, etc. And maybe 6% of you said to increase student competence. And as I told you in the beginning, all answers are correct. So let me just go back to my slideshow. One moment. Right. We are here. Right. I think I gave you these possible answers, and I'm very happy that you've chosen. Let me move on to tell you that these are not just the 5 possible advantages of asking questions in the class. There are actually many more. What are they? These are all the possible advantages of asking questions in the class. So it's not only to arouse their interest, but questions help you motivate your students and involve your students in the classroom progress and process. Questions help you give clarity to the students, And questions help you diagnose difficulties. So if a student is struggling, if a student is not able to follow you, and if a student is not able to answer your questions, that means that he is stuck there, and then you can help them. And to evaluate their performance, of course, this is one answer I think everybody knows already. Most questions that we ask in the class are to check uh, the kind of progress that students have made. In fact, all examinations, all tests that happen in the class are aimed at this process, and tests are usually questions. And to achieve success, of course, and to create agreement. Sometimes when the people who come with different points of view and different this is some kind of disagreement. So a question helps them. More questions means maybe possibilities of more agreement with each other, and to inspire confidence in the students, and to increase their competence, to empower them, to spark ideas. Sometimes questions ignite ideas, and to expand their vision, and also, quite importantly, to fuel their analytical thinking skills, their critical thinking skills, their reflective thinking skills, their creative thinking skills, and to improve their ability to probe deeper into things, and to develop insightful thinking on the part of the students. So these are lots of different advantages of asking questions. A class without questions is just a delivery of information, but a class with questions serves all these purposes. And naturally, a class with questions is certainly much more appreciated. So Einstein once said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, what would I do? I would not just go to answer a problem. So I will just try to spend the first 55 minutes, major portion. 55 need not be exactly 55, a major portion of the time available to me in formulating the right questions to ask. So, because if I know the right questions, getting an answer is not difficult. So it's asking questions that's more difficult than answering questions. So one who asks a question needs a lot more logical, common sense, and many other skills, knowledge related and skills related. And then only good questions can be asked. And if I know what are the good questions that I can ask, answer is obvious, answer is easy, answer is already there. He says, because if I know the proper questions, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes, is what Einstein said. And I think all of us also agree with him, and we say, if I know the right questions, I think finding the right answers is not difficult. There's one more interesting episode from Nobel laureate Isaac Rabi. He used to go to school like all other children, and he said that, like many other mothers, his mother did not ask him the same questions, same thing in the evening. So when children returned home in the evenings after school, typically, what do mothers ask? Mothers in India, at least, they ask, have you had your lunch? Were you a good boy there? And what did you do throughout the day? What have you learned from school? And did you misbehave, or did you behave well? These are the kind of questions typically Indian mothers ask, but maybe they may be the questions that mothers all around the world also ask. And most mothers around the world ask, did you learn anything new? What have you learned today? These are the kind of questions that mothers ask. But this Isaac Rabi's mother, she asked a different question. She used to ask every day, did you ask any good question in the class today? So did you ask any good question? Not just a question. Did you ask any good question? And he says that this one single habit that his mother inculcated in him made him a Nobel laureate, made him become a scientist, helped him become a scientist. So, I mean, for instance, how many of us ask good questions in our own classes? Let's try that today, right here. So let's check how many of you have good questions. So maybe if you ask good questions, what happens? So you are keeping yourself alert, you are involved in the process of learning, and you are engaging yourself intellectually in the process of learning, and you are giving feedback to the teacher, and you are learning more than others are learning. So asking good questions is a great quality. I think it cannot be denied by anybody, and the value of asking questions is, I mean, quite brilliant and quite useful. I'm sure all of you become good teachers by asking good questions, and you also become good students in programs like this by asking good questions. I expect some good questions today also. Last time I remember when I had two other classes, one on SWOT analysis, and what was the other one? The other one was on multiple learning styles, I think. So both the classes that I had with you, there were some questions, and you can try that today also. Okay, let's watch a video. This is about 3 minutes, and then please tell me what do you understand from watching this video. Something new, for instance, what are the kinds of questions? A child is very curious, highly curious. He asks hundreds of questions. So every day a certain number of questions are asked, and then as we grow up, it becomes much less. And what are the 3 kinds of questions that he's suggesting?
Where, why, how.
Where, why, how. Which questions are most important, he says?
How.
How questions. And in order, they should come last, because how questions, of course, are the most reflective and the most probing. The moment you begin asking how, it's like this, why it's like this, and why not it's like this, can it be different? So if you begin asking questions like that, automatically you become more creative. So there is a telephone in my hand, and should it be like this only, or can it be different? So the moment I begin asking such out-of-the-box questions that make me think, that questions that make others think. All knowledge starts with a question. So anything that you want to discover in the world starts with a question. So if you have a question in your mind, you will try to find the answer, and then that. So an answer typically is a kind of a full stop. The moment you have the answer, I mean that your journey stops there. But the question is the beginning of the journey. The moment you have a question, your journey begins there. It does not end there, it begins there. The more questions you have, the more journeys you set yourself on. And even if you are, for instance, when you are doing a PhD, you begin with a hypothesis. The hypothesis also comes with some questions. You want to test whether that hypothesis is right or wrong. So you are beginning with a question, right? So when an apple was seen falling, the first thing that came to his mind was, so why does an apple fall to the ground? That was a question. So the question led to an answer. The answer became a discovery, and the discovery became whatever. So the more questions that you ask, the more questions that your students ask you in your class, there is going to be more knowledge and more answers and more wisdom. This is one thing that I want to tell you. There is something about, I mean, it's not only just asking questions, it's also knowing how to ask those questions. That's, I mean, a little more important to us as teachers. There is an interesting story, and then after that I'll go to the next slide. So there were 2 monks, 2 sadhus, and both of them were heavy smokers. And they were so heavy smokers that they smoked all day. Even during their prayer times, they could not resist the temptation to smoke, and they wanted to know whether it was okay or not. So both of them wrote a letter each to their master, to their senior. So rabbi, or maybe pope, or whoever, and they wrote a letter. So then after 2 or 3 weeks, they got a reply. Both of them got a reply each. And the reply, what was they asked? They wanted to know whether smoking was okay or not. That was the question they asked. And the answers came. One got a positive reply, yes, and one got a negative reply, no. And the question was the same. How could they get 2 different replies? When they compared with each other, they realized that the way the question was framed was different. The first one asked, listen carefully, the first one asked, Master, can I smoke when I am praying, when I am saying my prayers? So, can I smoke when I am praying? Naturally, the answer was wrong. No, the master said, no, you cannot do that. The second one intelligently asked the question slightly different. He said, Master, can I pray when I am smoking? The same question put a different way. Can I pray? Can I say my prayers to God when I am smoking? And the master said, oh, there's no time that's not fit for praying. So any time is good. Whenever you can pray God, I mean, say your prayers to God, it's good. So even when you are smoking also, you can think of God. So as a classroom teacher, if I know how to ask a question, and if I know what answer I expect from my student, it helps me frame my question better. I think you've understood this concept. This example tells us that I think the one who is asking a question should not just shoot the question like that, but he must ask it a little intelligently. Let's see some more examples here. So I have some answers for you. There are 6 answers there. I would like you to think carefully and ask me a question so that the answer cannot be anything different. The answer must be that. For instance, the first one is a very straight one. You want me to answer you, my name is Raju. What question will you ask me? Anyone?
What
Sir,
is your name?
yeah, sir, do I know about you? So
Even if
everything,
whether you know or not, what question will you ask me?
sir, do you?
What is your name?
That's all. It's a very straight, simple question. What's your name? May I know your name? Right? Some question like this. I mean, it's not the structure of the sentence, but if you ask me a question straight like that, may I know your name, please? Right? What's your name? What do people call you? Or, I mean, what's your formal, some such thing. If you ask me, I'll give you that name. But there can be something a little more difficult questions. For instance, you want to get this answer number 4. How will you get that answer from me?
How do you spell your name?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Rajshri. Thank you very much. So if you ask me a question, how do you spell your name? I say R-A-J-U. The spelling is R-A-J-U. It's R-A-J-U. I have to spell out the letters of my name. If you ask me what's the spelling of your name, how do you get the answer 5 from me?
How long has been you in the teaching profession?
Yeah. How long have you been teaching? How long have you been a teacher? How long have you been in the teaching profession? So if you ask me a question like that, so the word since indicates. So because you ask me how long, I have to use the word since, and then only I can complete the sentence. So if there are any English lecturers here, they know that this is in the present perfect tense, and if the question is asked in the present perfect tense, I must answer in the present perfect tense. And so I've been a teacher since 1976. So this is, I mean, there is a little grammar involved in this and also some common sense involved in this. The last one, to create many more trainers.
How old are you?
Why do you
What is
do
your
you do this?
objective?
So what is your professional objective? What do you like to achieve as a teacher? What is your long-term goal? So if you ask me some question like that, this is the answer. So, I mean, before I go to the class, I make a list of the answers that I want from my students, and I formulate appropriate questions so that I ask them the right questions and get the right answers. Sometimes what happens, the teacher, either because he's not prepared or because he does not know the ability of his students, so what happens, they throw some questions at the students and they blame the student. Oh, these students do not know anything, and these students do not answer my questions properly. Actually, there might be some problem with us in the formulation of the question. But if I know how to ask the question right, the possibility of getting the right answer is always greater. This is called elicitation. Eliciting. I think you might have heard this word, elicit. E-L-I-C-I-T. So it's not just questioning, it's eliciting. So, I mean, my classes become interactive and my lessons become student-centered. My students get more engaged in my class if I continuously elicit things from them. If I only make it a one-way class and then it's just a presentation or a lecture or a speech or whatever, I think the involvement of my students is limited. I think their attention cannot be held for long. So this is how we have to start with answers and ask questions. There are 2 things that we can do in a class. We can fill our students' minds as if they were vessels, and then you give them a lot of knowledge, pour knowledge into that, open their brain and then put knowledge in that and then seal it and send away out of the college. Or you can ignite their minds and tell them, so you begin searching for on your own. You become an independent learner. So, I mean, the classroom serves a limited purpose, when a limited purpose in the sense, not exactly the word limited. It serves a much more purposeful. And when you ignite the mind of the students, because the student becomes autonomous, the student becomes independent, the student starts learning on one's own. I think most modern pedagogic ideas, teaching methodologies are based on this concept. So don't teach everything. The flipped method, for instance, and communicative teaching techniques today, or the project method, the newer pedagogical methods are based on this concept. So you ignite their minds, you give them a task and let them solve it, let them work on that, and let them learn on their own. The teacher must gradually make herself, I mean, as unnecessary as possible, even without the teacher also. At one stage, the student become completely independent. I think that's what happens to you when you do a PhD, for instance. There isn't anybody who is holding your hand and then taking you along, and the guide calls, the guide is called a guide, not a teacher. So he just guides you, okay, do this, do that, or maybe go here, go there. This is not right. So try again, think again. So these are the kinds of instructions the guide gives you. So, I mean, even a regular, ordinary graduate, postgraduate classroom also can elevate itself to that level if you know how to ask questions and ignite the minds of your students. Just take a look at the slide, take 2-3 minutes, okay? And then tell me whether you consider your classroom a class X or class Y. I mean, which ones are you do? For instance, if you do at least 4 or 5 of them on either side, your class is that category.
Class wise.
Your class is class Y. Why do you think it's a class Y, Shankar?
Learning is a continuous process because even teacher also can learn.
Do students ask you questions in your class?
Obviously, sometime whenever they ask a typical question, we need to search in Google sometime.
Right. And do you allow your students to think?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what is the goal of your class?
To inculcate, imbibe the more amount of the information related to the topic.
Right. It's not only just helping them pass the examination, getting good marks, and then being good students, but it can evolve to, I mean, helping students learn and become, I mean, real learners. So instead of teaching them, giving them knowledge, you can teach them how to gain knowledge, how to access information, how to analyze that information. I think a lot of you are answering the question. Let me just go here and read out the names. 1 second. I think many of you have said why. Yes, I think Priya Namrata had said why, Madhumita had said why, and then Vijita had said why. Yajnasrini had said class Y, Viman said why, Malavika, Devyani, and Rajashri, and a few others. I'm not able to read all the names, sorry. So many of you have said class Y. I'm very happy. I think if your classrooms are already Y, there is very little that I need to do now. I think you are already on the right path. So if you are if you are teaching in such a way that you are if you are allowing your students, I think lots of others also are pouring in. Naga, Arshita, Suchitra, Anurag, and many others are also answering why. I think, as I was telling you, if your classes are already the Y type, and if there are enough questions in your class, if you realize that your students are heterogeneous and then they are all different, and if you allow your students a lot of freedom, and if you empower them to ask you questions, and if you allow them to make mistakes, and through mistakes, if you learn them instead of castigating them, instead of scolding them when they make a mistake, if you tell them mistakes are okay, mistakes are the part of the process of learning. I think if you do things on the right side, I think you are on the right path, and I'm sure you're already very great teachers. Thank you very much for all your answers. I'm very happy. X also is okay, says Viman. Yes, there are a few instances perhaps when, for instance, if you are teaching only for the examination purpose, memory is good. But encouraging memory has a limited purpose. I think knowledge is not for memorization. Memory is one tool that we have. But I mean, your
Yes, sir.
classroom. Yes, please.
Sometimes that in class X, students listen. Sometimes it is required. Students should listen also. Only they
When I
should
say
speak.
students listen, I mean students only listen. That's what I mean.
Okay, sir. Then why? Always.
Students should not, I mean, maybe I should add the word only there. Students only are listeners in the class. Teacher does not allow them to open their mouths. Teacher does not allow them to participate in the class. Teacher does not allow them to think. And I mean, the only thing that happens is, I think, just listen to them, hear them. I think, Jnanasena, are you raising your hand? Yajnasena? Have you risen your hand? If you have a question.
No, sir.
Oh, right. I saw your hand risen. Right. So similarly, suppose you have very strict rules on the X side, Suppose you have two very strict rules, very limited freedom or zero freedom that you allow to your students. There is no empowerment. Sometimes if there are questions, the teacher asks the questions, but the students are not allowed to ask questions. Or if the students ask questions, they are either ridiculed or stopped or silenced, and answers are not given. And if the teacher thinks that one size fits all, so the same lesson, we discussed this when we talked about multiple learning styles. The same lesson does not cater to the needs of everybody. So the learning style is different. Sometimes even the content is different. Sometimes the methodology applied is different. Sometimes the reception levels are different, the comprehension levels are different. So a teacher must realize this. The teacher must realize and see that one size does not fit all. For the moment the teacher realizes that, the classroom becomes a little more effective. Anyway, thank you very much for your participation. I'm very happy that all of you are there listening and then participating and giving answers. Right. Coming to the grammar, the English grammar of asking questions in your classroom. So there are many ways of asking questions. Some 2 or 3 are very popular. The first kind of questions, English questions, begin with the helping verbs. What are helping verbs? Is there any English lecturer there? Anyone from the English department? Will you please tell me what are helping verbs?
Do, did, does.
Yeah, correct. They are examples. So helping verbs are, there's a limited list of them. So a very small number of them: do, does, did, done, and then have, has, had, is, am, are, can, could, may, might, and verbs of that kind. So very small verbs that you find before the main verbs are called the auxiliary verbs or helping verbs. So sentences that begin with helping verbs are questions in English. Are you writing something? Have you finished your homework? Do you know my name? Am I not your friend? Can I help you in this? So when sentences begin with these helping verbs, it's a question. Such questions end with a question mark. Such sentences end with question marks. The second kind of questions that you can ask in the class begin with the WH words. What are WH words? Anybody?
What, when, which, how.
Correct. Correct. So the words that begin with WH, what, where, when, who, whom, whose, etc., and also HOW, how. How does not begin with WH, but it's a very similar word, and that also is called a WH word. So what's your name? Where are you going? When will you come back? How do you know my name? Which is which, etc. So these questions are called WH words and WH questions. And there are some questions that are asked with which or what. They are also WH words, but I'll tell you the difference a little later. Then there are some sentences which end with question tags. I have already told you, haven't I? So haven't I is called a tag question. So the sentence is not a question, the entire statement is not a question, but the sentence ends with a tag question, a very short tag question. You know my name, don't you? So don't you is the tag question. And similarly, inversion, intonation, questions in the negative or the other kinds, perhaps you need not bother too much about them right for the beginning. It's not a grammar class, as I told you already. Inversion is, it's not exactly a question. You just put it in the tone of a question. You know my name. You know my name? So, you know my name. So by changing the tone, you make a sentence sound like a question. You know my name sounds like a statement. You know my name? Sounds like a question. So even changing the intonation sometimes makes a sentence a question. Right. So I think this is something very important for you, especially for the non-English teachers. There are various kinds of questions possible, various levels of questions possible, various types of questions possible, both for the students as well as the teachers. So let's see them in a little more detail. So the first distinction is between yes/no questions and information questions. What are yes/no questions? Obvious. I think anyone can answer that, I think. Do you know what they are?
These are close-ended, means you have to answer either yes or no.
Thank you, Devyani. So when you ask a question and there are only two possible answers, what are the two possible answers? Either yes or no. Do you know my name? If I ask you, do you know my name? You either say yes or no. If you know my name, you say yes. If you don't know my name, you say yes or no. So yes and no are the only two possible answers, and that kind of questions are called yes/no questions. But there are lots of other questions which cannot be answered with the word yes or no. For instance, if instead of asking you, do you know my name? Suppose I ask you, what's my name? So when I ask you, what's my name? You cannot say yes or no. You have to say something. Your name is. So you have to give some answer. So that is, you have to give some information as an answer. Instead of that one word yes or no, you have to give some information. You have to make a complete statement, or you have to give some possible information. That's an information question. So in the classroom, I'll come to them a little later again. So you can ask some yes/no questions. You can also ask some information questions. Right. Let's go on to the second category. So questions can be either close-ended or they can be open-ended. Does anybody know what are close-ended questions? Anyone?
The questions which have restricted answers.
Good. Thank you, Priya.
Questions have direct answers.
Yes, Vijita.
Yes, sir. The questions which have direct answers. Means there's no answers. Means there's no chance of asking one more question.
Okay, let me put it slightly differently. Close-ended questions are questions that have only one correct answer. A second correct answer is not possible. If a question has only one correct answer, that is close-ended. For instance, if I ask you, how many people are participating in this class now at this minute? So I see 39 there on the screen. 39 is the only correct answer. If anybody says 38 or 40 or 38.5 or whatever, is wrong answer. So one correct answer is 39. So that is a close-ended question. How do I make it an open-ended question? Open-ended question is a question, it might be obvious by now. So open-ended questions have multiple correct answers. The same question can elicit more than one correct answer. There can be any number of correct answers sometimes. So such questions are called open-ended questions. For instance, if it's asking you how many teachers are participating in this program, suppose I ask you, why are you participating in this program? I'm sure the 39 of you will give at least 10 different answers, 20 different answers, 39 different answers. So your answer is correct, your answer is correct, your answer. Everybody's answer is correct from your own point of view, because I asked you, why are you attending? I did not ask you what are the objectives of this program. If I ask you what are the objectives of this program, it's close-ended, because there are a set of objectives that have already been defined and you've been sent by the university and you have come here and you know why this program is created and then what it's expected to give you, what are the expected outcomes. But I asked you, why are you attending? So somebody may say, I am attending this program, I would like to increase my skills, to improve my knowledge, or because it's mandatory, I want to earn my next increment, or some such thing. Any number of answers are possible. We are not, sometimes they may be false, sometimes they may be right, sometimes accurate, inaccurate, whatever. But multiple correct answers are there. That's why they are open-ended. Then there are teacher-initiated questions and student-initiated questions. I think the name is very, very obvious. Can anybody distinguish the two? What are teacher-initiated questions and what are student-initiated questions?
So in class, suppose we ask students some questions while teaching, that is teachers initiated. While in between some doubts or some clarification that student require, they might ask some questions, that is student initiated.
Excellent. Thank you, Priya. Thank you very much. So the teacher asks questions in the process of teaching, and then, good teachers ask lots of questions in the class, and for all the purposes that we saw in one of the slides earlier. So for any one of those purposes, to achieve any one of those objectives, the teacher keeps asking questions. They are teacher initiated. But if you have bright students in your class, and also if you empower your students, if you create an atmosphere in your class where students have freedom to raise their hand and ask a question in between, sometimes interrupting you, sometimes adding to, contributing to what you're talking about. They begin, you don't initiate the question, they ask the question. They initiate the question. That is student initiated. Which do you think makes a class a little more interactive and a little more powerful and a little more productive? Which is better?
Student initiated.
Thank you so much. So I think if your students are asking you questions, you must be very happy. You must feel extremely excited that the students
Yes, sir.
are empowered to ask you questions in the class. And the more questions they ask, the more productive the class is. And I feel the same way. So if you ask me more questions, I'll be happier. The more questions means I think there is something happening in the class. The students are thinking, the students are applying their mind, the students are interacting, the students are empowered, etc. The next kind of questions are either they're called objective or impersonal, and subjective and experimental. I think you know this difference is not very difficult. Objective questions are like the multiple choice questions, yes, no questions, fill in the gaps, etc., where the answer is, I mean, objective. And whoever answers it answers the same way, or the answers has to be the same. And the student does not have to be very highly creative to answer these questions. So he finds one word, and then, for instance, when you give 4 words on the right side and 4 words on the right side and match them with a synonym, some such question. So this is objective type. Subjective type means they have to write a paragraph, write a few sentences, write a whole essay, or write their comments, write their views, write their interpretation of something. So instead of asking them to choose the correct answer, you ask them to write a sentence of their own. So for instance, I showed you that Menti slide where I gave you 4 answers. That was objective type. But now if I ask you, why do you think subjective questions are more useful in a classroom to build language skills of your students rather than objective type questions? So I'm asking a question where you need to write something. This answer cannot be copied, or even if it's copied out from somewhere also, you have to write it down. That's subjective. Actually, subjective questions, subjective answers are not copied. They must be one's own. Write an essay on, so you give your opinion about something. If you are appearing for competitive examinations these days, I think the examination system is gradually switching over to the subjective type. There was a time when there were whole, even the most respected examinations were completely objective type. But today we realize, I think I showed you one video when I talked to you about that multiple learning styles, about that fish taught to climb up trees, and I told you that objective questions or multiple choice questions are just useless. That's what he said. Right. So similarly, there are clarification questions and provocative questions. So you make a point and then you add some more thing and then you ask a question to check whether students have understood it or not. That is a clarification question. And it's a provocative question. What do you think? How do you interpret this? What is your opinion on this? And in case you had done this, how would you do that? That kind of questions are provocative. And similarly, let me not go into the last one. Let me check the last one. Direct questions and indirect questions. Does anybody know the difference? What is the difference between direct and indirect?
So a direct question would be obvious. An indirect question may have more implicit objectives in mind.
I think that's a word meaning, but the concept is different. Direct questions are questions that are directly asked to any one student in the class. Suppose there are 50 students in my class. I ask student A to rise and then, okay, answer this question. So the question is not aimed at everybody. So you're asking a very specific student. When do you ask such questions? If you think that a certain student has not understood your point, or a student is giving that that face of doubt, or when you think that the student is not paying attention to you, you ask a direct question. So you ask a student to rise and then you ask that student a question. That's a direct question. Indirect question means it's open. Anybody can. For instance, the question that I'm asking you now, right now, all the questions that I've asked you so far are indirect questions, because anybody can switch on the microphone, anybody can answer the question. I'm not specifically asking anybody. Of course, one of the reasons that I have here is that, I don't know who is following me, who is not. I cannot see your faces. And the second thing, I cannot see all of you on my screen. I can see only 1 or 2 of you. And that's why I cannot ask. It's difficult for me to ask direct questions in an online platform like this. But still, in case I want, of course, I can do that. But it's a little difficult. I have to change my screen and make some adjustments. But in a physical classroom, so I think indirect questions are possible, and then they are, I think, more advantageous. Now, before I move on, I just would like to ask you one question and stop there and then move on to the next one. So if you had an option, and if your objective is to make your classes much more rewarding, much more productive, much more engaging, do you ask the kind of questions on the left side or the kind of questions on the right side?
Right side.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks to all of you. Yes. So the questions, the types of questions that you see on the right side, yes. So the kind of questions that you see on the right side are much more intellectually challenging, and they are provocative, and because students are asked to think and answer those questions, naturally your students are, you can expect your students to be learning better and learning more. Let's see some of them in a little more detail. There are two questions on the screen. You put numbers before them. The first one is 1, the second one is a 2. Which one is a yes/no question and which one is an information question? Or maybe the first one, is this webinar hosted by HCU? The first one, is it an yes/no question or information question? You can write Y or
Yes,
I
no.
in the chat box. Y means yes/no question, I means information question. Yes, Priya, correct. Devya, Udayashri, and Shivani, all of you are correct. Very good, very good. Thank you so much. And what is this 1 plus Y? 1 is Y. Okay, 1 is Y. Yeah, the second one. Who is hosting this webinar? Is that a yes/no question or information question?
Information.
Thank you. That's information question, because who is hosting this webinar? You have to give some information to me. And that's a WH question. See the first word. I think non-English teachers can easily follow by seeing the first word of the question. If the first word is a helping verb, it is a yes/no question. If the first word is a WH question, it is an information question. Very good. Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. Sharda and many others. Right. So let's go to the second one. You have to tell me the first one. How many people are participating in this orientation? I think I already answered this question. Is that close-ended or open-ended? How many people? How many people?
Close-ended.
You just say C. C or O. C means close-ended. O means open-ended. Right. Priya, correct. Rajeshri, right. Viman, correct. And Shibani, correct. Vijita, right. Yes. Sharada, right. Devyani. Yeah, very good. I think you have got it. The second one, why are you participating? I think this also I answered already. I gave you this as an example. Why are you participating is open-ended. Very good. Good. I think you've got an idea of this. Excellent. I'm very happy. All of you have got it right. Let's move on. Yeah, the next one you have to tell me whether the question is a factual question or evaluative question. I did not describe them. Factual questions are testing the knowledge of facts. You taught them something and you are checking their knowledge of facts. And the second one, evaluative, is the student has to think, apply knowledge, analyze, synthesize, or whatever, and they have to answer. The first one, how many types of questions are there? Is it factual or evaluative? Yes,
Factual.
Jeff is right. Yes, right. Vijita, right. Devyani, right. Shibani, right. Correct. All of you are right. The second kind, why are inferential questions better than factual questions? Suppose I ask you this question. Am I asking a factual question or evaluative question? E for evaluative, F for factual. E, right. Priya, right. Vijita, Vivan, Shibani, Devyani, Lata, Rajeshri, Sharada, Muhammad Maveen, Malavika. Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. Very good, excellent. Let's move on from there also. Yeah, now you have to tell me whether this question is objective or subjective. I think I defined the difference between the two for you. First question is, which types of questions are easier to answer? You don't have to give me an answer. You have to tell me whether it is objective or subjective. Which types of questions are easier to answer? A, B, C. This is objective, yes, because the question demands a choice, not subjective, Priya. Yes, right. Let me take a minute to explain. This question, which types of questions are easier to answer? automatically suggests that there are some answers given. Maybe I've given you A, B, C, D, 4 answers or 5 answers or 3 answers or whatever. I'm asking, for instance, if you come to my home and I ask for you, do you like to have tea or coffee? Suppose, which do you like to have? I have coffee, I have tea. Which do you like to have? So which, the word which always suggests that's an object, the choice is limited. Which one is right? So if you ask somebody, which one is right? Which is a better course? Suppose you have BA, BCom, BSc in your college, and the parent asks you, which one is better? Which one do you suggest? That means the choices are limited, right? So in an objective question, there are choices already given. You go to a hotel and say, suppose the waiter tells you, we have idli and vada. Which do you want? So which do you want means there are only two choices. He has already given you 2 choices, and you have to choose only one of the 2. So in such cases, the question is bound to be an objective question because the choices are already given and you have to pick up one of the choices. But suppose you go to a hotel and the waiter tells you, what do you like to have, sir? What do you like to have, madam? So that means he's not limiting the choice to 1 or 2. Maybe there is a whole menu. There are lots of items. What do you like to have? What do you like to have means many more choices, many more options. And also, when somebody asks you an objective question, you have to, go by limited choice. And when you are giving a answer to a subjective question, you think, you reflect. For instance, when I ask you, which is your favorite type of questions, though there are 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever be the number of kinds of questions that I talked to you about and that you know. So I'm asking you to think, apply your mind, which is your favorite type. So that means everybody cannot give the same answer. So even if there are only 2 options, if I ask you, which is your favorite type, that means you have to consider it. So not only the number of options, but the kind of application of your mind that's essential, which makes a question objective or subjective. Right. So the next one, is it a clarification question or a provocative question? Let's see the first one. How do you structure a yes/no question? Don't answer the question, but tell me whether it's clarification or provocative. I'm asking you, how do you structure a sentence? Clarification, you can write C, and provocative, you can write P. Yeah, if you're not very sure, you can look at the second sentence also and check the difference. Yeah, thank you very much. All of you are right. Sharada, Vijita, Muhammad, everybody is right. Yeah, this is a clarification question because you're asking for a clarification. You already taught the structure of a question in the classroom, and the students now know that the structure of a question, yes/no question is it begins with a helping verb, then it has the subject, it has the main verb, etc. Suppose you have given them the structure. So the students have to tell that. But the second one, look at that. What if students set their own question papers? Suppose you allow students to set their own question papers. Is it a clarification question or a provocative question? Yes, correct. Iman, Vijita, you're all right. Sharada, Rajeshri, Devyani, Muhammad. I think only some 10 or 12 of you are answering all the questions. Others are maybe silently watching, I think. Shibani, yes. Yeah. Okay. So the second one is a provocative question because, you are throwing a possibility at your students and telling them, okay, suppose tomorrow I'm going to hold an examination and you are going to set the question paper. I think that would be wonderful. I think you are provoking them into thinking. And then I think I tried this. This may be off the context today, but I just would like to share an experience of mine with you when I was teaching long ago. So I tried this in my class once. What did I tell them? So tomorrow I'm not going to set the question paper. You are going to set the question paper. There are 50 students in the class. Everyone has to write down a question which you expect in the examination and pass it on to me. So I have 50 questions. Out of the 50 questions, of course, subject to some correction and all that, I am going to pick up any 5 in front of you, and these are the 5 questions that I'm going to give you for the examination. Of course, depending on the time available, depending on the ability of the students, depending on their grammar skills and all that, you can change this pattern slightly, and then you can open all the questions, and then you can just make editorial corrections, etc., etc. And you can also play a trick. Suppose they give you 50 questions and then none of the 50 is really worthy asking, and you don't open them in front of the students, you tell them all the 50 are listed and then you give your own same 5 questions that you had planned, but still students feel, oh, my question is asked, or the teacher has taken us into confidence, the teacher has empowered us. Students feel excited. So it's our own question paper. We said it. These are the questions that we asked ourselves. I mean, not every time perhaps university examination cannot be like this. Biman, do you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, the second question: what if students had to set their own question papers? Can it be open-ended question also?
I think it is certainly an open-ended question. It is an information question. It is an open-ended question. It's a provocative question. The same question belongs to many different categories.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
You're right. I'll come to that also. I have one slide on that. Thank you very much. That's a good question. Thank you very much. This is a teacher-initiated question. The first one, which type of questions would you like to have in the examination? So the teacher is asking. And the second one, what kind of questions are you going to ask us, madam, in the examination tomorrow? So that a student is initiating that. The student is asking. Of course, you need to look at this. You cannot guess from the sentences themselves, but maybe you can visualize the context in which a student is asking you that second question. Then there is another distinction between two types of questions. Questions can be either LOT or HOT. Does anybody know what's LOT? Anyone?
No, sir.
LOT stands for lower order thinking. Lower level thinking, lower order thinking. And you can guess what is HOT now.
Higher order thinking.
Higher order thinking.
That's all. Higher order thinking. Lower order thinking, higher order thinking means, to put it very simply, questions that are easy to answer, questions that are difficult to answer. Lower order thinking means not much thinking is essential. Students can remember and reproduce answers, or without much need for application of knowledge, they can answer the questions based on what you've already taught them. But the second set of questions are higher order thinking. That's why the students have to apply their mind. The students have to think. The students have to analyze. Then only they can answer. So that means they are much more difficult to answer than LOT questions. So LOT questions try only superficial knowledge of the students. They are close-ended typically. They are just memory-related things. The answer is already there in the text. So when I was a very young student at school, my teacher used to say, from here to here in the textbook is answer 1, from here to here is answer 2. Learn them by heart, and tomorrow when I come and then I hold a test and you write them. All that I needed was good memory, nothing else. Even if I did not understand anything, I could score a first division. I mean, because I could learn them by rote, learn them by heart. Right? So that is lower order thinking. Similarly, some just descriptive answers, paraphrasing skills, factual questions, how many, that kind of questions, etc. For instance, if I ask you, when did India become free? It's a factual question because, I mean, anyone who knows the answer 1947 gets full marks, 100 marks. But if I ask you, how did we get freedom? Or what do you think was the most important contributing factor for India to achieve freedom? So, I mean, the students have to work on, I mean, the fact that they have them and then analyze them and then you present their point of view or their understanding of the content. So the ones that you see on the left are the qualities of LOT questions. And the ones on the right are the features of HOT questions. So students need a very deep understanding, comprehension of the subject. And all these questions, HOT questions, are open-ended. They are evaluative type of questions. They expect students, HOT questions expect students to not just follow what you teach them in the classroom, but maybe they have to go beyond the textbook, beyond the classroom, and beyond the syllabus. Many of these HOT questions. Similarly, they demand critical interpretation, interpretative skills. They are experiential questions. Like, what are experiential questions? Experience questions are put yourself in the place of somebody else. For instance, you read a story and instead of asking you to write the summary of the story, write the summary of the story is a very straightforward question, and then this is a factual question again, because if they know the story, they write the story. But suppose I ask you, if you were that character, how would you have responded? Or if you had written this story, how else would you have ended this story? Or do you know any such story? So that's experiential. So the student has to put himself or herself in the shoes of the writer or a character or a critic or whatever, and then look at something and then answer that question. So that is experiential. How else would you have responded to this? How would you have behaved in such a situation? What is the title that you suggest to this story? These are all experiential. The last one may not be an experiential question, but the other ones, right? So creative. So you create, you write your own story. Okay, I give you a list of some 2 or 3 characters, and then based on them, you create a story. Or I give you the theme of the story, and you write a story of your own. Or you write any story about a very short note that I give you. Or I give you a picture and write a story on that. These are all creative. The student has to be creative. So it's not just language skills, it's not just sentence skills that you are testing, but you are testing the creative skills of the student also. So again, the question that I asked you when I showed you the previous slide, on the left are the qualities of LOT questions, and on the right are the qualities of the HOT questions. Which questions do you think are better for your class? LOT or HOT?
HOT, sir.
Rajeshri, where do you teach?
So this is Cotton University, Guwahati, sir.
Okay, right. Anyone else would like to answer that question? Biman says HOT. Biman, where do you teach?
In college, sir, SKR College in Assam.
Okay, because 2 of you have answered so far, and both of you have chosen HOT questions. And even Malavika and Yagnyaseni and Vijita says LOT. Let me ask her. Vijita, where do you teach?
I teach for undergraduate students, sir, in RBVR and Women's College. So I feel my students it's better to go for LOT type of question.
Great, great, excellent. Thank you very much for that discarded note, because many of you think that HOT questions are better, but Vijita thinks LOT questions, and she also gave a very good reason. She says that her students are not very bright and her students are not very interactive, and then she would like to ask very simple, easy to answer questions so that more students are involved. And those who said HOT questions are their choice naturally may have very bright students in your class, and they are capable of answering any kind of questions, and that's why you choose. I think Yahya Khan, you lost the connection. I think I was just I asked you this question, whether you prefer to ask LOT questions or HOT questions. LOT questions are lower order thinking questions, and HOT questions are higher order thinking questions. And the discussion is about which are better for your class. So like Vijita said and like others said, so I think Biman says, I think we should go from LOT to HOT. That's lovely. I like that. I like that. So, so it should be, I think personally, I think it must be a combination of both. Because there are some bright students in any class and there are some weak students in any class. So a class is always a heterogeneous. Even if you go to an IIT and teach there are going to be some students who are extremely brilliant and they love being asked questions. And here itself, there are 37 participants here. Some of you are answering every question. Some of you are just laid back, and some of you are responding slowly after careful thought. Some are not responding at all. Maybe it's not because they don't know the answers, but they do not like to participate for whatever reason. So all kinds of students are bound to be there in any class. And in such a mixed kind of a scenario, heterogeneous kind of a scenario, so it's always a good idea to have some LOT questions and some HOT questions so that everybody gets an opportunity. But there is a caution there. Suppose you ask an HOT question and make it a direct question. Suppose you ask one student to stand up and ask him a direct question, which is an HOT question. The student cannot answer that. You know that he is a weak student and they're asking him an HOT question. So the student cannot answer, and then he will be ridiculed by the other students, or he feels low of himself and he'll feel insulted. So when you are asking an HOT question, you must think at the back of your mind, So whether you should make it a direct question or indirect question, whom are you going to ask? So you must also take into account the ability, the level of your student when you ask him or her a question, especially when you ask direct questions. So after you've asked a student to rise, or after you've pointed out a student and then asked him to answer that question in your class, you must check what is the level of that student, maybe based on the previous questions that you asked him, the previous answer that student gave you. So you know you have an evaluation of your student in your mind. You know the level of that student. So pitch your question at the right level. So that's the idea. So let your, like somebody said, so move from LOT questions to HOT questions gradually. Maybe you can begin by asking a few LOT questions so that you will, which student is raising hand, which student is not raising hand, which student is answering how many questions, which student has really assimilated what you've taught. And then next time you ask him a better question, a higher level question, it will be easier for you. So it must be a good combination. Suppose you ask only LOT questions, the brighter students get frustrated. They think, oh, what is this? I think this is too very easy for me. I can finish this examination in 2 minutes and get out. And if you ask only HOT questions, the weaker students, they get so very frustrated, so good. I mean, they're disappointed, disillusioned that, I mean, they think that it's not their cup of tea and better they should either leave studies or they get backward or they get further humiliated and then further they go backwards. So it must be a combination and everybody must get enough opportunities to participate in the classroom questions. So what kind of a question is this? I think somebody asked me about that direct and indirect questions earlier. Maybe if you answer this question, you'll be able to follow answer to your question. So if you were presenting this webinar, right? Suppose I'm making the presentation now. Suppose you are making this presentation, what else would you have added? So don't answer that question now again. I'm not asking you for an answer to that question. Now look at the question and tell me what kind of a question is that?
So open-ended.
It's open-ended. Very good. Rajeshri, will you also tell me why is it open-ended?
Because there can be multiple answers, sir.
There
And
can
the
be
answer can be
multiple correct
subjective.
answers. Correct. There can be multiple correct answers. Everybody gives a different answer. Viman says P. What does it mean?
Provocative, sir.
Provocative. Thank you very much. Yes, it's a provocative question because students are provoked into thinking on their own and they are expected to answer from their own point of view. Vijita says open-ended, right? Correct. Any other answers? Is it a yes/no question or a WH question?
WL.
It's a WH question. What else? What else would you have added? That's a WH word. Is it a direct question or an indirect question?
Indirect question.
How do you know?
It's not directed at one particular individual.
Yeah,
Indirect.
because if you think the word you is aimed at one individual. So suppose I point my finger at one student and say, if you were presenting this, Rajeshri, if you were presenting this, Viman, if you were presenting this, suppose I asked one student and then it's a direct question. Suppose that you is a general term and I looked at the whole class and I looked at all the 50 students and said, if you were making this presentation, anybody can answer this question, etc., then it would become an indirect question. There is no clue in the question to tell you whether it's direct or indirect, right? Okay, let me just show you the answers. First, is it a yes/no question or factual question or open-ended question? Or is it information come factual come close-ended question? Or is it experiential and open-ended and information question? Or is it information come close-ended come experiential question? You can write your answer A, B, C, D in the chat box. Think, it needs a little thinking. Shankar says D. Rajeshri says C. Mohammed says C. And Mohammed says C. And Viman says C. Yahya Khan says D. Yahya Khan, will you please tell me, is it close-ended or open-ended?
So it is close-ended, maybe.
What is a close-ended question? Close-ended means only one correct answer.
One correct answer.
No, it's not close-ended because it says, what would you have done? When I say, what would you have done? Everybody will perhaps think of it differently. So it's not close-ended. So D cannot be the correct answer.
Okay, sorry.
So many of you said C. Let's see why it's C. It's an experiential question because every student has to think on one's own point of view and one has to answer. So it's experiential. It's open-ended because multiple correct answers are possible. It's an information question because it's not a yes/no question. It's a WH question. So the correct answer is a C. Thank you. I think you can try a few more similar examples later after going home. You can find some questions like this perhaps on Google and then you can try them. Okay, I'll leave this. I think we have another 10 minutes to go. What are some good skills? So suppose as a teacher, you know the kinds of questions now. You know what kind of questions your class demands and what kind of questions are appropriate to be asked in your class. And then you now have a set of questions to elicit answers from your students. Now, are there any skills that you need to practice to ask the questions the same? Even if you have the same set of questions, not all teachers handle them equally effectively. So what are some skills? So let there be as many questions as possible in your class. That's rule number one. Rule number two, ask as many open-ended questions as possible because close-ended questions are typically factual questions. So when did India become free? How many students are here? Are not very useful. I think they don't demand any deep thinking on the part of the student. So when you are asked, before you go to the class, practice your questions. So what are the questions you are going to ask tomorrow? How many of them are open-ended? And if you ask in close-ended question, always ask a weak student to answer that question. Make it a direct question. Okay, how many points have I covered so far? Where are we? What is the next point that we are going to discuss? So how many have we finished? So some such thing. If there is a very, very straight answer, you make it a direct question. You ask any student to raise hand. But the moment you ask open-ended questions, you can make them indirect, right? So use simple language when you ask questions. A student must be able to answer the question because he knows the answer to the question, not because he can understand the language of the question. So if you make the question difficult to follow, even if the student knows the answer, he cannot give it, right? So the language must not be difficult. It must be set as easy as possible. The language of the question must be precise, simple, and easy to follow. And as far as possible, involve all students. And when you ask some questions, instead of asking one student to answer the question, you can put your students into groups or pairs. First think, 10 of you, 5 of you, 4 of you, 2 of you sit together, think, write down your answer, and then you discuss, and then come to some kind of a consensus, and then give the answer. So what is happening? The classroom has become a collaborative scenario where students discuss, and naturally when you ask a little more difficult questions, the HOT questions, use pair work, group work, etc., so that the whole class is involved. And acknowledge all responses. I think it's very important. Every time somebody gives you an answer, you just say good, okay, why don't you think like this? Why is it wrong? Why is it right? Do you also think like this? That's wonderful, excellent, appreciation. So if you know how to respond to the answers, the students' responses will be they will be more willing to participate in a class tomorrow. So every time a student answers the question, because sometimes the classes are so very large in size with huge number of students in the class, other students may not follow what one student answered. So you can either repeat that answer or you can rephrase that. Sometimes the student makes some grammatical error. You need not repeat it as it is. You can make the correction and give the answer so that the other students get the answer right. For instance, today also you might have seen every time you gave those answers on the chat box, I was reading them out to you. I was giving responses to you. I was asking you subsidiary questions, etc. Then encourage student questions. So, I mean, make your classroom a place where students have the freedom to ask you questions. These are some skills that you need to develop in case you are not very comfortable asking questions in the class. Develop that skill. When you ask a question, be open-minded. That means if a student has an answer that does not strictly agree with what you expect from them, maybe allow some kind of leverage where the students have some kind of disagreement, especially when there are debatable answers. Ask only relevant questions and be specific when you ask questions. Then don't embarrass them. Some teachers, I know because I have this personal experience. If I don't know the answer, they either ridicule me, or sometimes they even insult me. Sometimes they embarrass me. They don't give me enough time to think. The moment they ask the question, the next second they are, hasting me to answer that. So sometimes I need a little time to think. So in such cases, it's always good to write down the question on the board, or maybe ask the question and warn the student. Don't immediately jump to a conclusion. Don't answer. You need to take 60 seconds to think, and then when you are ready, raise your hand. I'm going to ask it. If you give instructions like that very clearly, it becomes easier for them to participate. Don't be argumentative. Don't interrupt them when they're answering your question. And teachers also must be good listeners. Then finally, avoid all kinds of hyperbole, rambling from one context to another, and then confusing your students, etc. There is something called a wait time. So wait time is after you ask a question, you must give them some time to think. For instance, today also some 4 or 5 occasions, so when I gave you that Menti question, even when I am showing questions on the screen, I'm waiting because perhaps you need 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to first think, read all the answers possible, all the alternatives, and then think, apply the reminder. You cannot expect an answer immediately. So I cannot rush you. So there is something called a wait time. Wait time depends upon the level of the question. If it's a LOT question, maybe instant answers are possible. Yes, sir, this or that. It does not need much time. Even when it's an LOT question or a very routine kind of a question, which type of question, it still needs a little time. For instance, sometimes even to decide whether we want to have coffee or tea, we take time. I see when I go to hotels, so people, there is a very small menu, some 3 or 4 items. Still, people break their heads over deciding what to eat. So it's not easy. But when you ask an HOT question, you need much more time. Give them enough time. So that's what's called wait time. So LOT questions need less time to think and answer, and HOT type questions need a lot. Some questions need a whole lifetime, or maybe even if you spend, for instance, PhD itself, a question, for instance, your PhD thesis is based on one question or a set of questions that you formulated in the beginning, and you are taking 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to answer those questions. It needs a lot of research. It needs a lot of probing, some kind of a survey or whatever, right? Teachers should know this difference. And do you ask thought-provoking questions in your class? So these are some examples of thought-provoking questions. So students are made to think. What do you think? Why do you think like that? Why? For instance, somebody said D now. Immediately, I did not say wrong. I could have said, oh, the D is wrong. Somebody said D is wrong. I asked, why do you think it's a close-ended question? So is it a close-ended question? How many answers are possible like that? So, the teacher must have this patience to wait and then explain concepts to students and then make them think on their own. And if they have given a wrong answer, it's always a good idea to make them think and change their answers if necessary and come to the right conclusions. How do you know that? Can you tell me more about that? What question do you do you still have any questions in your mind? So these are questions. Examples that you see are not questions to be answered now, but they're examples of questions that are thought-provoking. So every day you can have at least one such question in your class to make your students think, probe deeper, arrive at their own answers, and be very highly subjective, reflective, and inferential, right? Okay, I think we have just 4 or 5 minutes left. This is, I think, one of my last slides. So what questions are most essential? This is perhaps my last slide. So this is something that I'd like to leave you with. Apart from asking your students good questions in your class, you must also ask very often, very, very frequently, you must ask yourself lots of questions. What questions are there? The questions that help you evaluate yourself, self-evaluation. I talked to you about SWOT analysis the other day. So what are your questioning strengths? What are your questioning weaknesses? For instance, questioning strengths means you know the differences, you know the various types of questions, you know why you are asking a question, you know how to ask that question, you know what kind of responses to get from that question, and also you know when, where, how to ask those. That's all questioning skills, questioning strengths. If you don't know how to formulate a question, for instance, or if you don't know the distinction between two types of question, or if you're asking a direct question where an indirect question would have served better, that's a questioning weakness. So maybe you have to build yourself on that. So self-evaluation questions that help you become a better teacher are a few things that are essential for every one of you. Please develop, please improve your questioning skills and become better teachers. So this is my mail address, nagaRAJU@gmail.com. And this slideshow that you've seen is available to you on slideshare.net/nagaRAJU. So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. We have another 4 or 5 minutes left. In case you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. We'll spend some time discussing them.
So can I add an observation?
Please.
So when you said that we have to ask our questions according to the abilities of the students, but as since we are all college teachers and university teachers, and this is higher education that we are talking about, so in higher education, is it not necessary to have critical abilities and to learn to engage with more challenging questions rather than
You must.
being used to objective questions? Yes, sir.
You must. That's why, for instance, if there are different levels of students in your class, you always pitch your questions one level above them. Suppose the weakest student should not be asked the hardest question. A weak student can be asked a question that's one level above him. So you are making him think. You're gradually helping the student evolve to a better level. So suppose you ask, the brightest student the easiest question. Again, it will great disappointment. No? So there's no point in asking him how many questions are there, how many times have I written the letter A on the board. So this is a meaningless question, useless. It's counting, mathematical ability. Other than that, it does not serve any purpose. But suppose you are giving a project, so it need not be the same project to everybody. So when I said keep the level of your students in your mind, it does not mean that you must ask them only the questions that they ask, that they can answer. What I meant is that you must ask them a question, at least they can attempt to answer, at least they will strive and they will develop their analytical abilities. So otherwise, I think the student gets psychologically shattered. He thinks that he is not capable of anything.
Thank you, sir, for that excellent answer.